I'm really happy to be here. My name's Jen Goldson. As most of you know, we're the lead consultant on the Comprehensive Plan project. And today we're just really excited to share with you the upcoming Phase 2 launch, which is a big push on community engagement. So I'm going to start with that in a minute to show you all the kind of the overview of the different tools that we're about to launch with you. And then we'll also do a review, kind of a high-level review of the existing condition profile that you received in your packet last week. And then we'll just take any questions that planning board members have. And I see there are a number of folks watching as well, so I'll leave that to the chair to take comments as well. We also have some of my colleagues on. They're probably in the participation room. I'm not sure that they're panelists, but Elena Zabar, our community engagement specialist, is here, as well as Flavio Villa. We're going to be presenting some high-level findings from the build-out analysis, and Flavio did a lot of work on that. So they're kind of in the background, but if we end up having some questions, they may chime in on those aspects. All right, good. So again, I'm Jen Goldson. We're the primary consultant, JM Goldson, and you'll see the different roles that we have as part of this project. We also have several other consultants who are part of this team. So we have Emily Innes from Innes Associates focused on the zoning analysis. We have Kittleson focused on the transportation and mobility analysis, and then Cambridge Econometrics on economic conditions. And they're not here today, but we've actually taken their work and incorporated it into the summary that you received last week. So we're going to talk a little bit just about the fundamentals of what comprehensive planning is. I'm sure at this point the planning board knows exactly what it is, but just more for the benefit of folks who might be just joining into this conversation for the first time, we wanted to just spend a few minutes describing what this plan even is about, or what it will be about, and what this process is about. And then we'll go through the Phase 2 community engagement tools that we are on the verge of launching next week. And we want to walk you through each of those tools so that you understand what they are and what their purpose is, and also so the community can start to hopefully get excited about participating in the conversation using those tools. And then we're going to share some of our research, our findings, and then we'll talk a little bit about next steps and hearing your thoughts and getting us your comments. So you've seen this before. I like to always anchor us in where we are in this process. And so this is a 4-phase process. And we are right at the very beginning of this second phase, which is really the community visioning and goal setting phase. This is where we first start to work on policy, is in this phase. Before that, we were really just trying to get some basic understanding of the community. And then from there, we'll go into, in the spring, Phase 3, which will be more focused on how do you achieve that vision and goals that you established as part of Phase 2. What kind of strategies, what kind of regulations, what kind of initiatives, where do you want to spend your money? That's what happens in Phase 3. So you get really into a lot of the nuts and bolts. And then at the end, next summer, really into the winter, into the late fall, we'll really pull it all together into a plan for you. All right, so I'm going to keep going. I'm happy to go back if when we get into the question period, if folks want me to go back to anything, happy to do that. All right, so let's talk a little bit about comprehensive plan fundamentals. So a comprehensive plan, the beauty of a comprehensive plan is it's one of the few times the community gets to think really big picture and start to make connections around all of these different aspects of the community and really think in a very forward-looking way, looking a decade out into the future. And then this type of comprehensive plan, when it's finished, really helps to guide those specialized plans. You've already been doing a lot of specialized plans. You have a great comp plan from about 20 years ago, and that really helped guide you in the last couple of decades. And that's what this plan will do as well. The state really anticipates that people will update their plans roughly every 10 years. Doesn't happen in every community, for sure. We've certainly come across communities that haven't updated their comprehensive plan in like 60 years or 50 years. So 20 years isn't too bad, but the ideal would be every decade. because things change and you can't anticipate some of those changes. You also can't anticipate technology and other innovations that might be available in the next, 10 plus years. The plan will also help you really look at your existing assets and leverage those so that you can really try to attain your goals through the assets that you have access to. And then it helps to identify what are those priorities. There's lots of competing interests in every community. And so future decision makers will be guided by this plan because the community will have really told them through this planning effort, what are our priorities and where do we want you, local decision makers, to focus your energy, focus your time, focus your funding. So at its heart, we try to answer a bunch of questions with a comprehensive plan. So these are some questions, not saying I got them all, but just to give you a sense of some of the core questions. How might Gloucester strategically protect its assets as well as leverage them to shape the change you want to see? Rather than being as reactive, it helps you get into a more getting ahead of things, a little more proactive seat. Who are you? What is your authentic identity? Historic preservation can play a part in that. So can arts and culture. Lots of things can play into your identity. And what we're trying to understand is, what does your community care the most about? What are its priorities? And then how might your community balance competing interests? We're under no illusions that everyone in the community will agree on exactly what the priorities are. And so this process will be a process of trying to balance and find some harmony between those, what could be competing interests, some tensions, but we also find there can be a lot of synergies among different interests. And so a comprehensive plan is required in Massachusetts to focus on these 7 statutory elements. But you'll see in the work that we do, we're really looking for those interconnections, which I'll talk about in a minute. But the 7 statutory elements are here: cultural and historic resources, demographics and housing, employment and economic development, land use, transportation, public services and facilities, as well as natural places, ecosystems, and sustainabilities. And we've updated some of these terms. The statute is a little bit old and uses a little bit language we think that is a little bit old. So you'll see, instead of using a term like natural resources, which has this idea of, you're extracting value out of it, we're really talking about natural places, ecosystems, and sustainability. So you'll see us update some language like that. All right. And like I mentioned a moment ago, these are really very interconnected. We don't believe you can look at them in silos. Some communities plan, let's spend a few months on transportation and we'll finish that. And then we'll spend a few months on housing and we'll finish that. We don't work that way because we think that there's so much that you can miss. We want to ensure that none of the elements and the goals conflict with elements and goals in other areas. So we really look at it all together and look at those interconnections. How can a goal in one area support a goal in another area? Okay, and so we are in phase, we're moving into phase 2, but what I'm going to present tonight is the work we did in phase 1. In phase 1, I look at on this looking at this tree as a metaphor for the plan. Phase 1 is really just establishing that trunk, that foundation that will hold up the rest of the plan. We want to understand the trends and issues. We gather a lot of information, and it really helps the consultant team. It may also help you, but really, you probably know a lot of what we found just from living in the community and experiencing the community and serving on boards and committees. So it's a big undertaking for us to learn about the community. And of course, we can't learn everything. So we're going to continue to look to community members and to you all to help us fill in any gaps. But really, that's what we've been spending the past few months, really just trying to understand the community, build this trunk of the tree. What phase 1 is not about is we're not intending to offer any recommendations for policy at this point. We're really just trying to understand facts on the ground. The recommendations will really come out of the next several phases of the plan. And so we view really the heart of the planning work as developing this canopy of the tree. what is the community's vision? What are you aiming at in the next 10 years? And then we start to fill out, the branches are like the goals of the plan. The branches are like things that hold up, conditions that hold up that vision. And when we get into that, we'll describe that even more. And then the strategies, as I said, come later, and those are like the details. Those are, how are we going to do it? What are there going to be zoning changes? Are there going to be new programs? So that just gives you a sense of what phase one is and what it's not. And really, we're moving into phase two right now. And so phase two, it's very, very critical in phase two, especially to engage the community in as deep as well as broad a way. And we'll explain how you can do that. But, I think you had something like, I think someone said it was either 1,500 or maybe more participation points in your last planning effort. And that is excellent. And we hope to match or exceed that amount, because the idea is really to have a very inclusive engagement process. And that goes beyond having in-person engagement. So I'm going to talk about all the different ways that you can reach out to the community. And a big push will happen over the next few months. And that's really the start of creating this vision. What does this canopy look like for Gloucester? What is the next decade? What do you hope it will bring? What should stay the same and what should change? All right, so let's talk about phase two, which we are ready to launch next Friday is our goal. We have all of the tools created, and city staff is just in the process of reviewing those now. So I'm going to go through and tell you about each one. But the idea of phase two is really to get the community to start to think aspirationally. We want them to dream, what would a wonderful future for Gloucester be like? What issues would be solved in the next decade? What things, assets, resources, places, what cultural aspects, what will be protected? That's perhaps not protected right now. So we want them to dream. And then the thinking part comes a little bit later in phase three, when we're putting actions to the dream. So when we think about engagement, our community engagement specialist, Alana, who's on this meeting, she's really thought really hard about how can we use our tools to, number one, go to where the people are. So we're not always asking people to come to us, come to a community forum, come out of your house and gather with us. We really want to have tools that also go where people already are or where they're comfortable being. And we'll talk about how that works using the various tools. We also think it's important to decentralize the process. Part of this is going to where people are, but the idea is also we don't have, two community forums and that's it. We really have so many ways to integrate into the community that it becomes very decentralized. And we think that's really the best way to engage as many voices as possible, including and particularly voices that don't normally show up at a public forum. And so these tools offer variety that allow kind of various types of engagement. So some tools will provide the opportunity for really in-depth conversations for folks who want to spend hours talking about their vision and the goals that they want to achieve. We also have tools that allow for more privacy, folks that aren't, looking to really engage and talk with other folks, but out of the privacy of their own home, perhaps they can take our survey, for instance. And then we also offer people just a quick way to share. Some people may not have a couple hours to spend, or maybe they don't even have the time to put into the survey. So we want to have some quick ways to share thoughts as well. And so by structuring the engagement in this way, we feel that you'll reach not just the broad community, but also provide for that in-depth opportunities to have those conversations and reach populations that are harder to reach. All right, so we already really started this with the first community forum, which was on September 9th. And what I would love, I'm going to pull up the participant list, who I can see right now. And what I would love you to do is just raise your Zoom hand if you can. If it's easy and you can find the tool, raise your Zoom hand to tell me if you attended the September 9th Community Forum. And I see one person with a raised hand prior. So if you could lower your hand just for now, if you did not attend the forum, and then raise your hand if you did attend the forum, that will help me get a sense of who's in the audience. So it looks like maybe just 2 of you attended the forum. I'm looking for some other hands. Okay, it looks like we have 14 attendees, and out of the 14, well, some of them are people from my team, but out of the 14 attendees here, it looks like 2 of you have attended the forum. All right, well, that's good to know. So there were close to 80 people who attended the forum. You can see some photos here. We gathered lots of Post-it notes ideas. What are some top issues you hope this plan will address? Who are you? Where do you live? Things like that. And so participants went through these different stations that were staffed by planning board members and town staff from the community development department. And they were looking to identify current issues, think about what you value, tell us what are things you value about Gloucester, and then learn about the project as well. It was an opportunity for really the first time to just learn about what is this project and how can I be involved in it. So that's what I'm going to talk more about now. So tool number 2, the first community forum was our first tool that we launched. The second tool I'm going to talk about is something we call a meeting in a box. Now, we didn't create this. This was created a couple of decades ago in the 90s by an architect. And it's, but we've actually refined it and customized it. We've been using this tool for close to 10 years now. And each time we do it, we refine it a little more. It's really it includes a bunch of broad questions. And the idea is it's a do-it-yourself meeting kit. The project team, me and my staff and your city planners, they can't get all over the community in the way that the community can get all over the community. So what we'd like to invite everyone who's participating in this meeting and more to do is use this meeting kit to host your own meeting. It can be a very small meeting, could be 4 neighbors over for coffee. It could be your book group getting together. It could be if you have a religious institution that has a coffee hour, you could host something there. You could host, I know one of the neighborhood groups is planning to host a larger event and have multiple tables where they can really use this meeting in a box to focus on, I think one group wants to focus on housing issues and another group wants to focus on climate issues. And so this will be the perfect do-it-yourself meeting kit for any of those types of scenarios. It can also be something that's more official. And one thing you'll probably see on the corner here, I have a note, calling all planning board members, please host at least one of these meeting in a boxes. And what we've done with some other client groups is they've decided to host at a public place, like a library or the city hall, get a room, put it in the paper or advertise it and say, anyone who wants to come to my meeting in a box, I'm having one Saturday at 2:00. So you can certainly make these very public and you can also make them very informal and more private. And so the idea is that for a couple of months, folks will be really doing these widespread throughout the community. And then the other thing, this is the way it can grow exponentially. Everybody who comes to your meeting should be given their own meeting in a box packet, which you can just print out and encourage everyone who attended your meeting to then host their own meeting. And so if everybody does that, you can see how that grows exponentially. So we've had a lot of success with this reaching lots of different populations in the community and really kind of lowers the bar for folks that, maybe don't feel comfortable or don't have the time to come to a big public forum. All right. And so I just want to give you some examples of what's in the meeting in a box. And again, we're launching this next Friday. So there are instructions, pretty detailed instructions for the host, because we really want to support you. We give you lots of advice, helpful tips for how to host it. We give you a sign-in sheet. We walk you through each of the questions. And one of the first questions, I don't have it on the screen, but it's where are Gloucester's special places? That was one of the activities in the forum as well. And then the second activity you can see here, what is your vision for Gloucester's future? And this can go in any direction. It's very broad. And then we have sections that are more specific, and they're specific to these topics: living and working in Gloucester, operations, public operations, facilities and services, as well as transportation. How do people get around? Protecting and adapting the community. So this gets into impacts from climate change, resilience, sustainability, historic preservation, ways to play in Gloucester and experience Gloucester. This gets into recreation opportunities, arts and cultural opportunities. And then we have a closing section that is identify tensions and synergies. As I said earlier, we view these all as interconnected. And so we want you to go through the exercises in these categories, but then think about, well, how are these things connected? What are some potential tensions? Maybe there's some tensions with our hopes for how people can live in Gloucester versus how we might protect our assets or our natural places, or how we may adapt to the impacts of climate change. And so we want you to think about it all together as well. Now, that all being said, it is very common for groups to only want to focus on maybe one of these topics or maybe two of these topics, and that's totally fine. You can cherry pick this and just hand us in, well, I want to focus on housing, so I'm going to look at the living and working activity, and that's the only one I'm going to do, and I'm going to submit my answers. That's fine. It's very open-ended. We meant this to be extremely flexible. But many of you will probably do the whole thing as well, which of course will take a little more time. All right. So I just have some examples. I just pulled out, I think, two of these just to show you how it's organized. So we have activity 3 is living and working in Gloucester. And then we give you some question prompts. Imagine an ideal future for Gloucester 10 years down the road with regard to residents, housing, and businesses. Who lives here? What different housing options are available? What kinds of jobs are available? What kind of businesses would you like to see? And we give just some examples. You certainly don't need to stick to the examples. And then there's a lot of blank space for folks to take notes on the conversation. And then your job is just to give us the notes. We'll type them up, we'll analyze them, we'll put them into themes, and we'll see what folks said. And you'll actually get a quantitative analysis of this qualitative exercise. So we actually start to count up how many times did different groups mention this particular thing as being important or as being something they hope for. And so you'll see that we'll be able to give you statistics from this tool. All right, and then this is just another example. I pulled out activity 5 in this tool, which is protecting and adapting Gloucester. And so you can see there's a lot of prompt questions. You can go off script. This is very open-ended. You don't have to go through and answer each question. The idea is that it starts to get you thinking about, well, what do they mean by protect and adapt? And so you can see we ask very broad things. What would you like to change? What would you like to stay the same? Think about historic and natural places and ecosystems, as well as the city's ability to adapt to climate change. And so we have all these different prompts. And again, you can go in any direction that you want. So very open-ended. All right. The next tool I want to talk about is the community survey. Again, launching next Friday. And I wanted to give you a sense of what that survey is going to be like. So the survey will take roughly, according to SurveyMonkey, that calculates how long a survey will take, it's somewhere between 15 minutes and 20 minutes. So I don't want you to get the sense that you can do this in a couple of minutes and be done. We're doing a comprehensive plan, and the word comprehensive is very telling as to why this survey is on the longer side. We've done this in every community we've worked in, and it's actually the response rates have been very, very high for the survey. The good thing about the survey, because it's so long, we've set it up so people can come back. They can take a little bit of it, take a break, go make dinner, whatever, come back before bed, finish it out, as long as you're using the same device. So that gives folks the chance to take it in pieces. The other thing is we can provide hard copies that community members can put different public places around the community or hand out to folks like at tabling events. And then we'll work with the city to make sure that those results can then be entered in to the online survey so that it's all together. So I'm going to run through just very, very quickly a few of the questions. I have not touched all the questions, but I wanted to give you a sense of what the survey is like. And so we start with some very broad overall questions. We pulled some responses from the forum. So for the folks that are on the call that came to the forum, thank you. Some of these words may even be yours. We asked you what 3 words or phrases would you say encompass what you love about your community? And we pulled from that list the top words and phrases that people offered. And then, of course, you can add other phrases. We're not trying to say that the participants on September 9th thought of all the things. And so we have an area for other as well. And the idea is that these words can then be worked into your vision. All right. Or the words that come out of the survey as the most important or top choices. Another series of questions actually focuses on doing what we call a Likert scale, looking at each category. So I'm starting here with historic and cultural, and this is just an excerpt. This is much longer than this, but we go through different categories of historic and cultural considerations, and we ask, is Gloucester's community image and reputation currently a great weakness, a strength, or a great strength, or I don't really know, I'm going to just choose NA. And you just go down and you sort of use this ranking scale or rating scale, I should say, to go through the various points. So we have questions on historic and cultural assets. We have questions on housing. And we're really trying to get you to think about the current what's happening in Gloucester right now. What issues are you seeing, or what weaknesses and strengths, I should say. We have a section on economic. And so you can just scan through and see the kinds of things that were asked. And again, this is just an excerpt. The list is much longer than this. And we have multiple questions on each of these. It's not just this rating scale. It's also some open-ended questions, as well as a few other questions about issues and opportunities. And then we have a section on transportation and a section on climate and sustainability. Again, only a partial list, but you get the idea of what we're looking for. And then there's more. And so I didn't want to go through the whole survey with you tonight, but just want to give you a little sampling of it. The areas I didn't show on these slides, there's also an area for parks and recreation, an area for public facilities and services. We have a whole bunch of demographic characteristics to ask your personal demographic characteristics when you take the survey. And I mentioned this at the survey, so you'll hear me repeat myself for those of you at the forum, for those of you who are there. The reason we do that is not to be nosy or pry. And yes, this is an anonymous survey. We do it because we want to make sure we're reaching representative samples of the whole community. So if we find that renters or older folks or younger folks or people who own businesses or people who have lower incomes, if we find that they're underrepresented, then we're going to be working with the project team to do even more targeted outreach through the survey perhaps, but also through the other tools like the meeting in a box. If we know that one neighborhood is not being well represented in the survey for whatever reason, we can try to push the survey link out to that neighborhood more, but we can also try to organize meeting in a box in that neighborhood, or we can also use some of the other tools. So that's why we ask for demographic characteristics. It's not that we're trying to pry, but we're trying to make sure that we get a representative sample of your population, so that we don't just hear from the typical people who are always involved, and we thank you for being involved, but I know that the city also wants to hear from other folks in the community as well. And then you'll see we just have a bunch of open-ended questions. I just did a couple screenshots for a few of them. There's open-ended questions throughout, and these are just some examples. So you can see there's a way to just give general feedback as well. All right, next tool. The crowd mapping tool. This is an interactive map, and you'll see that you can go online and you can use points. There are different categories like a live and work category, serve and connect, preserve and protect, and they show up when you use those points. You drop it on the map and you say, I think there's housing opportunity here, or an economic development opportunity here, or I see an issue with some existing business or industrial use or whatever it is. I see there's a opportunity to preserve something that is not protected currently. So you take these different shaped pins, you drop them on the map where you'd like to say something, and then you fill in. There's a little open-ended comment section, and you say why you dropped a pin there. And then what we do with that. Oh, and you can also see other people's ideas and comment on them. So that can start to become a dialogue. You can look through the map and see, oh, well, that's interesting. Someone has this idea for connecting this open space to that open space. And I never thought about having a trail in that location. And you can even go in and comment on that person's comment saying, I really like this idea. So it starts to have a little bit of a dialogue in that way. And then we are also going to be monitoring for any offensive language or spamming. We know that unfortunately in the age of doing things online, that does happen from time to time. So we will be on the lookout for that, but we don't anticipate having any issues. And then I just want to show you, like, what do we do with that when we are done asking folks to contribute? Well, this is an example in Topsfield. And so what we did is we looked at the different ideas that people had under different categories, and we make something that's called a heat map. And you can see what that looks like. The darker areas, so the purple is people who responded to the live and work category. And the darker purple shows that a lot of people were talking about this particular area of Topsfield, which happens to be their downtown area. And they saw a lot of opportunity for both live and work opportunities in their downtown. And then you can see as the color gets lighter, people had some ideas for other areas of the community, but not as many people. So that's how the heat map works. And then we have this, new ideas in this blue, and then we have serve and protect, or serve and connect we did in this one. And there were some other categories too, but those were the main ones I just wanted to show you. We can also overlap these and kind of show an aggregated map, but it's nice to see them individually as well. And in Topsfield, you can see a lot of the ideas were for their downtown. All right, and then the next tool is tabling at community events. So our engagement specialist has gathered and is in the process perhaps of refining that, a list of events going on in the community during this phase 2 engagement. And we are going to be providing you with activities, materials, whatever you need to get out there in the community at these events. It will be a combination of city staff, perhaps other project team members, and the idea is that you go out to as many community events as possible, so that you go where people are already gathering and you can start to give them information about the project, talk to people. They can spend 2 minutes talking about it. They can use this little map saying, where do I live in Gloucester? Just like you saw at the forum. You can use the same kind of map, gather little dots about what neighborhood you live in. You can learn about the project and you can do activities. You can get the link to the survey. You could do it on your phone. You could take a flyer with a QR code home. You can get a link to the crowd map as well. And so the idea is that people can do something super quick while they're just passing by. Maybe they're at a farmer's market or some other event in the community. And it's a great way to engage people and get them to know people who may not even know about the project. So you get to talk to folks and then you get to direct them to, taking the survey, doing the crowd map, or even hosting a meeting in a box. You could even have hard copies of the meeting in a box on your table and say, hey, would you like to host a small meeting? Just send us the comments when you're done. All right, and then we also have another community forum that will happen. We're targeting March. We don't have a date yet, but we're looking for dates in March that will work with, other events you may have going on. And the idea there is that we'll take all of the feedback that the community gives us through all of these tools. We're going to give a summary to you, a very detailed summary on every single tool. What did people say? We're going to give you a transcription and our analysis. And then we're going to create an aggregated summary. We call it the ACEs, Aggregated Community Engagement Summary. And that will provide you at a very high level what what was the community telling us? What were the main components of a vision? What kinds of goals would the community support? Where were the primary issues that they want this plan to address? And from that, we'll draft a first cut at the vision and goals based on that community engagement. We'll use words that people gave us, phrases, we'll use priorities, we'll try to integrate everything that really we saw some threads and themes going through the engagement. And then we want to have, so this process is very iterative. So then we want to have a forum to show you, all right, this is what we're hearing from people. This is a draft vision and goal statement and some core themes that are coming out of that engagement. What do you think of it? How would you change it? What would you add to it? And so that community forum will happen in March. And then from there, we'll revise and refine the vision and goals before we move into the next phase, the strategy phase. All right. So I just really wanted to get you excited about what's coming up. There's so much that's going to be happening this fall and into the winter. But now I want to shift gears. So we gave you a draft deliverable last week. That was a summary of existing condition profiles. And so I'm just going to go through that very high level. There's a lot more detail. And then we'll take questions. So why do we gather so much data? As a planner, I have seen plans that don't have a lot of data. I'm always surprised by that. When we work in communities, it's so important that we have a baseline of data that we can refer back to as we're developing strategies, as we're developing perhaps some metrics to measure goals. We want to look back at some of that baseline data. And so I love this quote by Andy Dunn. It says, "Passion provides purpose, but data drives decisions." And so in the spirit of that, I'm going to present to you each of the different statutory elements, just a few key findings. And what we'd love for you to think about as I'm going through this, or even as you're reviewing that document, and you don't need to give feedback tonight. There's, I think we're looking for feedback. It says on one of the slides, but I think it's Halloween. We're looking for feedback. But some of the things we'd like you to keep in mind. Do any of these data surprise you? Is there anything you're like, oh my gosh, I'm shocked? Or even, does anything not feel right to you? Like, I see that this data source says X, but on the ground, this is what I'm seeing. And I question the validity of that data source. And that's fair. The data is not always correct. So keep that in mind too. And then, did anything confirm what you already knew or suspected? Like, okay, I didn't know the numbers, but yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense because of the lived experience in Gloucester that you all have that we don't. And then, do you have suggestions for other data sources, perhaps local data sources that we didn't use, or other resources we can draw from that might be helpful? Because as we're, as I said, putting metrics into goals and creating strategies, perhaps there's something that we didn't realize the community had resources and data on that would help us. All right, and so the contents of this summary document includes demographics and housing, economic development and economic conditions, transportation, natural places, ecosystems and sustainability, cultural and historic resources, public facilities and services, land use and zoning. And so it's uh, pretty detailed and also broad in terms of all of those different categories. And so you might wonder where we got our information from. And so we looked at your recent plans and studies, and those findings are integrated into the analysis. We also use the US Census Bureau, a few different data sources from the Census Bureau, as well as Massachusetts specific data sources that we've listed here. And then the community also, city staff also provided us with other local data and resources as well to add to these other pieces. All right, so let's get into some of this. So one of the points we wanted to show you, we do look at population projections. We brought these back to 1980, and you can see that from 1980 to 2000, there was a bit of an increase in your population, but then it started to dip after your 2000 plan, it started to dip down in 2010, and now it's rebounded a little bit, but it's not quite back up to the population that you had in 2000. So you've actually seen just under a 2% population decline between 2000 and 2020. Now, the confusing thing are the projections. So it'd be really lovely if we could say, okay, well, this line will just continue straight out the way it's been going. Or is it going to take a sharp turn? Or is it going to take a dip? And the truth is, we don't really know. The different state agencies are in the process of updating projections, but the projections we have currently are saying all different things. So it's very hard to predict. But what we can look at is that your population has not, sometimes we see communities with very steep increase in certain years. That's not what we're seeing here. We're seeing kind of a gradual increase and then a bit of a decline and then a gradual, not quite back up to 2000. But the interesting thing is, since your population declined almost 2%, it's interesting to look at, well, how does that compare to the region and the state? And it really is not, it doesn't compare, it's really not aligned. So Essex County grew about almost a little over actually 9% in that period between 2000 and 2020. So as Gloucester lost population, the county actually grew about 9% and the state grew about 8.4%. So the trends in Gloucester are very different. No, there's probably lots of reasons for that, and we don't know precisely what it is. It could be your the number of housing units that have come online. It could be many different factors. We also know that your household sizes are getting smaller. You have a growing senior population. Most of the people living alone in Gloucester are seniors, and you have fewer families with children. The older population, 65 and over, is projected to be about 36% of your population in the upcoming years. And while your household size is decreasing, we're seeing 45% of the people living alone are seniors. And then the number of families with children went down about 23.3% since you did your last plan. So from 2000 to 2020, the number of families with children reduced by 23.3%. So let's look at housing. So housing costs, as we see really in many places in the nation, certainly Massachusetts, certainly your region, and in Gloucester, this is aligned in many different geographies. Housing costs are outpacing incomes. We're also seeing that out of your renters, about half of them are what we call cost burden. That means they're spending too much for their units. It can lead to housing instability. It can lead to even homelessness if it's severe enough. And so you can see this chart is explaining that to you. So I'm going to walk you through this chart. So on the left here, we have different household income levels. So we call the bottom here extremely low income, those making less than 30% of the area median income. And then we have the moderate income, making less than 80% of the area median income. And then we have different categories in between, or I'm sorry, different programs call moderate income different things. So moderate income in this chart is 50 to 80% of the area median income. And I'm sorry, I was reading it wrong. The top one is over 80%. So households that are making more than 80% of the area median income. And I'm going to talk to you in a minute about what the median income is, but what I really want you to take away from this is the number of households that are experiencing what we call cost burden. And so if you're moderately cost burden, which is shown in the blue for these different categories, that means you're spending 30%, between 30% and 50% of your household costs, or I'm sorry, of your income is going toward household cost. And then if you look at the area in the people that fall into the salmon color, or the households, I should say, this is what we call severely cost burden. And this is the number we look at very closely. This means that people are spending more than half of their income. So let me say it again. They're spending more than half of their income And you'll see that over 1,500 people in Gloucester, I'm sorry, households in Gloucester are spending more than half their income who are in this extremely low category. So that's a very big number, and that is really saying there's a lot of people at risk of housing insecurity. And when we look at your renters, nearly half of them are cost burdened. So that's one issue we really wanted to point out to you regarding lack of affordable housing options to support, especially those extremely low and even very low income. Those are your greatest needs. And then we also looked at household size. How many people live together in a household? And what are the housing unit sizes? And what we found is there's a mismatch. So you have a lot more households now with just one person living alone or two people living together, but your unit sizes are much larger. You still have a large single family stock. So your unit sizes are 3 and 4 bedrooms and more. And so it doesn't mean a single person can't live in a 3 or 4 bedroom home, but when you're looking at a combination of who is cost burdened by their existing housing situation, and are there options for folks who are spending too much to be sustainable on their existing housing? Are there options to move into lower priced housing? Now, you don't just have to have affordable deed restricted to solve that issue. You also just need smaller units. They can often be less costly to rent or to purchase. If you purchase or rent a studio or a one bedroom, there's also less energy costs, less maintenance costs, and it just provides, different options for people at different times in their life, different preferences, et cetera. So there's all sorts of reasons to think about the housing unit sizes, and looking at cost burden and cost is one of those reasons. All right. I'm happy to go back and answer questions later, but I just want to move through these. I know that we're, getting up there in the time right now. And I just want to say that as we're going through this data, we're not pointing to one solution or even any solution right now. We're trying to look at these data and try to think of, well, what questions does this point to you answering? So one of the questions we think that the community may want to think about when you think about housing is, do you want to encourage more smaller homes or not? And if you do, what kind of changes would you need to make? What kind of housing choices would help older residents? You have a very strong older population that's growing in Gloucester, and your younger population is reducing. And so what kind of housing options can help support that aging population? And so those are just some questions. And you want to think about not just existing Gloucester residents, but new residents who might be moving into Gloucester in the next decade, and what are the broader needs there. All right. So let's look at economic characteristics. So we have just a few indicators here. There's more in the report, but your income is lower than the county and the area median income. And so Gloucester's median household income is about it's almost 83,000. It's 82,984. That's an estimate. And then if you look at the county's median income, it's a little bit higher. It's 86,684. Employment growth has been slower in Gloucester than in the county and in the state. But we did see that your post-pandemic recovery was strong. We also pointed out in the report that the city is one of the key partners in the North Shore Blue Economy Initiative. And you're also in a strong position to grow the marine biotech sector. And so some of you, I don't know if everyone's familiar with the North Shore Blue Economy Initiative, so I just wanted to just take a moment to explain what that is. It is really a research collaborative between UMass, the city of Gloucester, and Cape Ann Chamber of Commerce, and some other partners as well. And it really focuses on sustainability in healthy economies, livelihoods, and ocean ecosystems. And it includes boat building, coastal tourism and recreation, marine transportation, and marine resources are its general focuses. And then the other point we have on this slide is just that the high school graduation rate is higher than we're seeing in the county and the state, but bachelor's degree attainment is a little lower. So in our economics section, we did look at what we would call your workforce. All right, we also looked at transportation and mobility. So many more people, residents of Gloucester, leave Gloucester for work. during the day than come to work for Gloucester. So that's just one thing we look at. Where are people going for work? How many of them are working in Gloucester? How many of them are leaving Gloucester? How many people are coming into work? We also see that most residents drive alone to get to work. There are proportionally fewer car-free households in Gloucester than in Essex County or in the state. And bicycle and pedestrian facilities are limited, which are likely contributing to lower rates of walking and biking being seen in Gloucester. And so Gloucester residents take transit to work 50% less than residents of other North Shore communities. 76% of residents drive alone to work. Only 8.5% of Gloucester households get around with no car, whereas in the county it's about 10%, and in the state it's about 12%. And then we found bike lanes existing on Main Street, East Main Street, Eastern Ave, and really downtown is well connected with sidewalks, but then the multimodal accessibility really drops beyond downtown. So we also looked at safety. And so we saw fatal auto crashes occurring on higher speed roads, which makes sense. We also saw, though, higher rates of property damage in auto crashes. So not as many fatalities, but more property damage. And that was seen particularly in downtown streets. And then, yeah, I think those are the main things. But you can see in this map, the areas in red are really where the fatal injuries have been seen. And then we have all the non-fatal and crash locations also mapped on this. So when you look at the summary report, you can get a better look at this map, but we have mapped all of those. Okay, talking about natural places, ecosystems, and sustainability. So Gloucester really has been very active, engaging in broad ecological planning. Being a coastal community, you've been very, I think, proactive about that, including for energy use, land conservation, climate resilience. Developed coastal areas are, of course, no surprise here, high risk of flooding due to sea level rise and more powerful storms, although you do have some good topography that gets properties sort of out of that level of the flood damage area. Downtown Gloucester also has something called environmental justice index. I want to talk about that a little bit, and then I'm going to talk about what we mean by heat island effects. So environmental justice index, it's really statewide, and it documents where populations are living who are either meet one of these three or have three criteria, or there's a second category. So I'm going to tell you the first one first. So it could be communities that have, or neighborhoods, I should say, that have median income that's not more than 65% of the state median. 25% of the population lacks English language proficiency, and the BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color populations are more than 40%. So that's one category. Or BIPOC populations are 25% or more, and the median municipal income is not more than 150% of the state median, which yours is not. So that's how those neighborhoods are identified. And so downtown Gloucester has a high environmental justice index. And it's also, and we look at what kind of climate impacts and other impacts, land use impacts are these populations more prone to be impacted by. And one in Gloucester is heat island effects. So that means, lots of pavement, not as much green area to absorb the effects of heat islands. You see that in more urban areas. And one of the solutions is bringing more green to those areas. All right. Let's go on to historic preservation. So the city has a very strong network of organizations that promote both historic and cultural resources. And that's really a strong asset. One thing, though, that we feel is less comprehensive is the level of legal protections for you really do have a wealth of historic resources, but just under 5% of all your resources are permanently protected. You have lots of other designations, but they don't permanently protect those resources. And so what do I mean by permanently protected? I mean they're either in your local district or they have a preservation restriction. And your local district is relatively small compared to all the resources that you do have. And then you can see on this map, we've mapped using the Massachusetts Historic Commission's database that's called MACRIS. We mapped where all your historic resources are, and you can see on this map the different levels of protection. So we have National Register Historic District, which really just protects from state and federally funded projects, but it really doesn't inhibit a property owner or the town for that matter. But it does provide some tax incentives, so we can't overlook that for income generating uses. We have inventoried areas in the brown. We have national and local historic districts. We also show your lighthouses and burial grounds on this. And then we show you these different neighborhood or areas resources that we've called out. And you can see we've gathered some metrics here too. How many historic areas do you have? How many historic buildings? How many historic burial grounds, etc. Another thing we just wanted to point out is that you also have about 20 houses that were built either in the year 1700 or before in the 17th century, which is quite unique. But none of those houses are protected by the local historic district. They're all outside of the local historic district. So just a few things to point out in historic preservation. And then looking at cultural resources, really Gloucester is so well known for robust cultural activity. I tried to get into the Hopper exhibit the other day when my husband and I were visiting, and of course we didn't plan ahead enough. We're a little too impromptu, so we didn't see it, but we understand how attractive Gloucester is to people who come from really all over the world to go to your cultural resources, museums, and cultural districts, etc. It's really quite impressive. You do have two cultural districts. You have your downtown, and then you have your Rocky Neck. All right. I think that's roughly all I wanted to say on that slide. There's certainly more to say on cultural resources in general, but of course we can't get into too many details right now. So for public facilities and services, many of you probably know this, you really are exploring several major building projects. Your new projects are being identified, including adding water and sewer access. And then provision of public services, of course, will be affected by changing demographics, older population, aging population, changing lifestyles, changing work habits, especially since COVID pandemic, and then climate change impacts. So all of these things will affect and contribute to really great public service and facility needs over the coming decade. The other thing we just want to say is anecdotally, the municipal turnover of elected officials, mayor, city council, being a 2-year term, what we've heard is that it's made consistency somewhat challenging. So we just wanted to also bring that up. All right. And of course, I should mention too, your school enrollment has been declining for decades. I mentioned before the declining number of or percentage of families with children. And of course, so that's no surprise then that your school enrollment has been also steadily declining in the past 20 years. All right, we're almost done with this, and then we'll open up for the planning board's questions. And so we have land use section. Most of the land in Gloucester is undeveloped. It's open space, either protected or unprotected open space. Half of the structures, half of buildings in Gloucester were built before 1939, so quite an old stock of buildings, which makes it very special historic place, but also can provide challenges with regard to accessibility and heating costs, things like that, energy efficiency, repair and maintenance. Development of new buildings has slowed dramatically. You saw pretty good development before the 1990s, but in the past 30, 40 years or so, it's really declined dramatically. And then you have a lot of environmental constraints as well, which you'll see from the various maps, not so much this one, but the various maps in the summary show environmental constraints. All right. We did look at zoning. Over 90% of Gloucester is zoned for residential use. Half is more rural, low density zoning. The city's also adopted several what we would consider land use zoning best practices. In fact, you've been, I would say, quite progressive in that regard. So you have inclusionary zoning, you allow home occupation, you have accessory dwelling units by right, you have cluster and open space residential development, you have overlay districts for floodplains and watersheds, you allow by right two family development in about 82% of your land area. So all of that is we would consider land use zoning best practices. Single family housing is still, though, the most easily permitted residential use, and then multifamily is permitted by right only in the central business district. So those are some limitations. All right, let me take a little drink here. Just a few more slides. I want to go into the build out analysis, which you'll get a more detailed memo about, and certainly have access to these maps that I'm showing so you can see them a little bit more closely. But first, I just want to say, what is a build out analysis? This is not a phrase that everybody knows. So a build out analysis is really an academic exercise. So I want to make sure nobody is scared by this analysis, because it's really like it's a very theoretical exercise. It's looking logically, what is the maximum potential development that could be built by right, so with no special permit, with no variance, just by right, you go in, you get a building permit. How much development could you see under your existing zoning regulations? And we look at both vacant land that's developable without environmental constraints, and we look at potential redevelopment opportunities. What are uses that perhaps the value of the improvement on the land is less than the value of the land itself? And so that may indicate that this could be ripe for redevelopment. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, but that's, we try to put like our developer thinking hat on, and where would the market kind of drive redevelopment opportunities. And then we look at environmental constraints. We look at a variety of environmental constraints, as well as regulatory constraints, including your dimensional regulations. So we include in the analysis your setback requirements, your height requirements, and there's all sorts of pieces in addition to that, like your parking requirements and all sorts of other pieces. And then the question is, well, why do you want to do this? If it's just theoretical, it's probably never going to happen. Why do you want to do it? So it shows you, zoning is a policy, right? It's something that people made because they wanted to see their community develop or not develop in certain ways. And so zoning creates opportunities, and it creates limitations, in addition to infrastructure limitations and environmental and other physical constraints. So it shows, well, what direction is your zoning pointing in as written? And it can provide insights. If you look at what your vision and goals are that come out of this next phase, does what zoning is allowing to be developed, does that conflict in any way with what your community hopes will be developed in the future, or hopes will be preserved in the future? And so it really provides insights. Are there conflicts between what our zoning policies say and what we want to see in the community? And it just helps you decide, well, what do we want to change about zoning? If we think it's pointing us in a good direction, then maybe we don't want to change too much. If we think it's pointing in a direction that really conflicts with the community's goals, then maybe you do want to think about changing zoning as part of this planning process. That's what we're hoping to help you determine. And that's why you do a build-out analysis. So what did we find? This is sort of the bottom line. There's many, many layers to this analysis and lots of assumptions. So if you have questions, just let us know. But the bottom line is, if you looked at all those factors that I just listed on the slides, you could permit up to 1,003 units of housing and about 3.2 million square feet of non-residential space. And so I just want to put that into some context. And so you have about 15,133 housing units currently. Well, I think that's actually as of the 2020 census. And this number, 1,003, represents about just over 6.5% of your existing housing units. So I'm not going to say that's a lot or a little. I'm just going to give you the number and you can make your own judgment. And then for your non-residential space, you have about 5.2 million currently of non-residential space. So that includes commercial and industrial uses. And this is 3.2 million. So I didn't actually calculate the percentage, but you can see that it's, quite a bit of the existing. So 5.2 million is your existing, somebody could probably do that quickly and post it in the chat. 3.2 million is what the build out analysis shows that you could build or redevelop. All right. So that's everything. I know that I just went through a ton of information, a lot of detail. I'm going to stop talking now. I'm happy to answer questions. We have close to a month. We'd like comments on the profile back by the end of the month, so on Halloween. And so again, if you feel like there are facts that don't seem right, or if you're curious about something, let us know in the comments. And we're going to do a round of revisions in November to finalize that profile. All right, so just back to these questions, and then I'm going to take the slides down so we can see everybody. But would love to hear either now if you want, or by October 31st. Would love to hear, did anything surprise you? Do you question any piece of the analysis? Does anything not feel right? Did something that I said or is in the report confirm something that you already felt, that sounds true to me? Or do you have any suggestions for other data or resources that you think we should look at that we didn't look at? All right, so thank you. I appreciate you bearing with this. It's a long presentation.